Everybody, we're back with a healing journey. We hope. I sure need some. Okay, we left off and started out with what an indentured servant was. What is indentured servitude? Let's keep going. This is video number 2, by the way. Did you know where the word slave came from? Anybody? As if I can hear you answering me, right? Well, I didn't either. I really didn't. I thought it came from slavery. Duh. No, I had no clue. It arose in the consequence of the wars waged by Otto the Great and his successors against the Slavs, Slavs, like slave without the E, like slaves without the E, but a capital S is where a peoples, Slavs, comma, and a great number of whom they took captive and sold into slavery or slavery. It is of German origin, the word Savani, Germany. Savani, Germany. Okay, so this Slav people, and hopefully I'm pronouncing it right. I don't think it's Slav, who were, conquered in battle and taken into captivity and sold into slavery. Thus, we have pretty much a definition of the old world, this slave word, and its origins, other word origins, and similar words. So let's get into that. A slave is a person who is the chattel, like cattle, but with an H in it. Chattel, or property of another. It's from the old French word esclave. Esclave, esclave. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. This is not a language class. I don't intend to make any excuses, but I'm spelling it out for all of you linguistics out there. If I said that right. Esclave, Esclave, in the 13th century. Also, it originates from medieval Latin. The word sclavus in the late 14th century. Sclavus, S-C-L-A-V like Victor, U-S like Sam. Sclavus meant slave in the 14th century. A source also, Italian, it was schiavo. Schiavo, or chavo if the I was silent. S-C-H-I-A-V like Victor, O. French, esclave, and it's repeated for some reason, but that's how the source has it. Spanish, esclavo. E-S-C-L-A-V-O, esclavo. And by the way, as said in the first video, this second video, these videos are intended to be about 30 minutes long. And I have an alarm clock set, if you hear that go off, to prompt me to stop so we can prepare for the next video. Okay. Originally Slav, like those people, the Slavs. So S-L-A-V-S, Slavs. Sold into slavery by the conquering peoples. Okay, the oldest written history of the Slavs can be shortly summarized. A myriad of slave hunts, like you go hunting, and the enthrallment of entire peoples. The Slav was the most prized of human goods. A myriad of slave hunts, the enthrallment of entire peoples, and this Slav person, captive, was the most prized of human goods. That's way back, what is it? Way back when. Why so prized? Why would these people be so prized other than, I guess, so we won the war, you're a captive, or what then became, I guess, prisoners of war. So you're this great prize? Well, because it was considered that their strength was increased outside of his land of origin. Now was stronger when he wasn't at home. Hardened against all privation. Just, I guess, from typical human person to just this hardened person, shell of a thing, I guess, person to just any privilege, just deprived. Very industrious, laborers, workers, work. Content with little. I don't know who thought that one up, to even imagine that someone would be you could even use the word content, but there it is. These Slavs were content with very little. Good humored. Well, I mean, I don't know if they were good humored to begin with, and then they just maintained their good humoredness as a part of their nature. I'm not sure if they were all good humored about the situation they ended up in captivity, but it says they were good humored and cheerful. Now you're going to periodically hear me say, wow, and that's coming from me. Quote, wow, exclamation mark, end quote. Okay? You're going to hear me say that. And when you hear me say it, it's coming from me, not from Etymology Online or where. It's coming from me. It's coming from me on this channel. So after that reasoning of why these Slavs were so prized, well, I'm going to give you my first wow. And let me add on a really. And another one, really. I'm going to try to, stay with the study so that it is understood, especially when you guys go online and see these same words, that I am trying to stick to the study of this, the learnedness of this healing journey road of information. Doesn't mean I don't have feelings along this road. It must be remembered that for every Slavonic slave who reached his destination, at least 10 succumbed to inhuman treatment during transport and to the heat of the climate. Now, we went over what an indentured servant was, of someone's own free will, a 4 to 7 year contract, relatively poor, maybe even a criminal servant, the servant indentured servitude instead of being hung for their alleged or proven crime. Low wage, manual labor, paying out debts, signing this contract to work for something, it's room and board and whatnot in the low wage sense, but free. And then we get into these Slavs, 13th century origins and 14th. That was a long time ago. And if anyone watches these videos in order, it would be best. Then you'll recall that I did say that I would take us back to before the Atlantic slave trade just a bit. Let's get some real origin going here, so we can have some really, hopefully better understanding of things. But this inhuman treatment part and transport and the heat of the climate and all that. Well, I mean, I would imagine, I guess, if people were conquered in war, that they were, taken on a chartered chariot or anything or whatever. But so I get that part for that time and for what, unfortunately, they were conquered. But this whole back before that, good humored and cheerful and stuff. So we're going to move on into time frames of what this word meant, this condition, if you will, this word origin, slave. In the 1550s, it meant one who lost the power of resistance to some habit or vice. One who lost the power or resistance to some habit or vice. Now, habits and vices, it's good when somebody can lose the resistance to habits and vices. But that's what it was described at. So I don't know how it was a habit to be a captive or a vice, but in the 1550s, that's how it was described. Also, to enslave. It meant to enslave from slave. So to be a slave meant you were to put someone into being a slave status. That was to enslave. The meaning to work like a slave. People have said that one. And whomever has said it might want to think about saying certain things once we learn their origins. To work like a slave. That was in the 1550s. Okay, let's get into some statuses and early legalities of the English colonies, slavery in America. And I'm giving you this backdrop for the reasons that you will learn very shortly, because we're jumping from the 1550s to the 1640s. And obviously, we haven't hit the slave trading ships and all that good part. In 1640, a Virginia court sentenced John Punch, like the drink, an African indentured servant, remember that one, to a life of servitude for running away with two white indentured servants, Englishmen in the colonies, who all got caught. The two whites were only sentenced to an additional year of their indenture, their contract, their indentured servitude, and 3 years service to the colony. Origin of community service, maybe? That's my question. Okay, similar there. This marked the first de facto legal sanctioning of slavery in the English colonies, which was America, the first de facto sanctioning, legal sanctioning, which had no slaves of the 19, and I've seen 19 and 20, so we're not confused as we research history. Some historical versions say that there were 19 Africans, others say that there were 20. One difference, one number off doesn't appear that it's going to change this issue. So this particular information, English colonies which had no slaves, of the 19 first Africans brought to Point Comfort, Virginia, and is often been said, well, how ironic to call for Africans in what would eventually become slavery, to a place called Point Comfort, and was the first legal distinctions made between Europeans and Africans. So you had African indentured servants and English, European indentured, British English indentured servants. But with this situation with John Punch and his two white counterparts, that I guess they got tired of their contracts and run off. He got sentenced to a lifetime. They got what was it? 1 extra year and 3 years of service to the colony. And so everybody knows what de facto means, because it says this marked the first de facto legal sanctioning. Well, let's see what de facto means. In fact or in effect, whether by right or not. An example of de facto is a rule that people always follow, even though it is not an official procedure. In 1641, and this is not to point out any specific place or state or country or continent or group of, sets of rules, because we're going to go over all of it. So it's not to discriminate against anyone, or put somebody on the spot and all of that. It's history. 1641. Massachusetts was the first colony to authorize slavery through enacted law. So now it's not this de facto stuff anymore. A year later, not in Virginia, but in Massachusetts, they went from de facto to in facto. Enacted law called the Body of Liberties. Look it up, Body of Liberties. One could sell himself into slavery if you were a captive of war. These were the different statuses of this authorized slavery, legally authorized slavery. A captive of war, sentenced to slavery by the governing authority, like that de facto first guy, John Punch, who ran off in Virginia a year earlier. By a court, a legal issue, etc. These statuses were referred to as, quote, strangers, end quote, in the Body of Liberties. So even though the law authorized slavery in these varied conditions and varied ways of getting into it, but they were considered strangers by name, if you will, not necessarily slaves. They were not generally English subjects or the white English, British people in the colonies that colonized America. So colonists came to equate this term with Native Americans and Africans, strangers, through authorized slavery varieties, strangers. Well, they were different from them as far as, culture and whatnot, but I don't know how on earth a Native American is considered a stranger. It was strange to them. Okay. 1654. And this time it's just about up. So you guys know if you've got something to do or whatever, you'll be able to take a break because I've got to keep it going. 1654, we've just got about 2.5, 3 minutes. John Casor, or Casor, it's Casor, John Casor, another Black indentured servant in colonial Virginia, we're back in Virginia now, was the first man to be declared a slave in a civil case. Now, remember, it was indentured servant, and he run off, and then he got a life of servitude. And then in Massachusetts, it was turned into authorized slavery in this variety of ways, but you were a stranger. And then in 1654, which was a little over 10 years later, back in Virginia, he was the first man to be declared a slave in a court case. And this was due to two whites, two English people in the colonies. I mean, the word white I'm getting from the research, so don't think I'm calling people whites and blacks and this and that. I mean, that's what we're identified as, often even on official forms we have to fill out. But these are words from the research that you can see for yourself. Just look it up. So that's why I may say English colonist or British English colonist, so that we understand who we're talking about. So two whites suing each other in court in 1654 in Virginia over violations of John's terms, his contract of indenture to them. So apparently he had indentured himself to both of them for a period of time, and somebody's argued was fighting over, I guess, breach of contract, supposedly. So a Northampton County court ruled he could be held, quote, for the duration of his life, end quote, but as a slave, declared a slave. Now, I'm not sure how old John was. It doesn't say in that particular research, but it was still a landmark ruling. He was still the first. Lifetime of servitude, but in the slave status because, it was enacted law. John Casor, Casor. And since we're just about out of time, I'd rather kind of play Beat the Clock until I get more of a hang of this. Well, look at that. There we go. See you on video 3. Remember, John Casor, 1654, Virginia, first Black slave.